My name is Jane Hill, and this is the 100% Project podcast series. In this series, we're talking about psychological safety in the workplace, specifically as it relates to contributing to a more creative and innovative environment, as well as providing everyone the opportunity to work more flexibly. Our new research, Breaking Dad, has found that often men don't take parental leave, even when it's available, because of their concern, either real or perceived, about the reaction from their employer and or their colleagues, or even the pressure they put on themselves about the potential impact to their career. This in turn prevents mothers from returning to the workplace sooner, impacting their career progression and their financial security as their income and superannuation is reduced. Today I'm talking to Rose Herceg, President of WPP for Australia and New Zealand. WPP is a creative transformation company who use the power of creativity to build a better future for people, our planet, their clients, and the community. Welcome, Rose, to our podcast series.
Thank you so much, Jane. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. So can you please start by telling us a little bit about yourself, your career path, and how you ended up as President of WPP for Australia and New Zealand?
Sure. Well, my road to WPP was an unusual one. I have spent the bulk of my career self-employed. I've had 3 small businesses and I've sold 3 small businesses. My first one I started in my early 20s, and I actually sold it to a company that was then called STW, which later merged with WPP. And so, believe it or not, the only corporate gig I've ever had is the one I'm in right now, which is the Chief Strategy Officer of WPP. And it's really given me a unique perspective because, again, I've come from a background that's been very scrappy. Anyone who's listened to this who's self-employed knows that when you are self-employed, you end up doing everything. You lick the stamps, you do the big presentations, and you do everything in between. And so my road to the corporate world that I'm now in was a very unusual one, and it didn't involve any hierarchy. So it's been a really lovely way of coming into this role.
Wonderful. So the advertising industry has always relied on accessing global talent and moving global talent around the world to get different experiences. I'm wondering if you can talk us through how the border closures due to COVID have had an impact on your very creative global industry.
Absolutely. Well, look, like every single business, particularly those in the creative industries like ours, we love and rely on the ebb and flow of global talent. And of course, with borders closed, that hasn't happened. But I guess rather than look at that as something that we cannot control things like that, we've actually looked at a lot of our people within the business, particularly our younger people, and we've given them real opportunities to shine. So we've promoted, we've moved people around. We have these 10 global networks, these terrific businesses like Ogilvy, AKQA, VMLY&R, Wunderman Thompson, Group M. And we've been able to give a lot of kids that probably wouldn't have a shot, a much bigger shot. And so we've looked within, and I think it's actually been thrilling because right now I'm thinking of several younger people that I'm working with, aged probably 27 to 31, who are now doing jobs that they probably would have had waited 5 years to do. And they're loving it. And so, again, we've tried to attack it with a really positive sentiment and give people a real shot at success. And it's wonderful to say that they're thriving.
That's great. It's so wonderful to see these silver linings come out of such a tough time for the world over the last couple of years, particularly for the next generation of people. I'm interested in, the Me Too movement has sort of taken the world by storm over the last 5 years or so. And many industries have had their version of the Me Too moment. And I'm wondering, how has the advertising industry fared, and how much of a focus does WPP have on gender and gender equality?
For everything you're reading about us, it's everything to us. If you look at our statistics globally, if you look at what's happening in Australia, roughly 40%, slightly more, depending on the company or the network that you're talking to, is led by women. So we are doing everything we can to make sure that we have equal representation, but not only with regard to gender, with regard to everything that we can do right across the board that is all about diversity. So we're looking at gender, we're looking at nationality, we're looking at cultural background, we're looking at all the things that we should be looking at. but making sure that we very, very soon have an equal representation of men and women in the most senior roles. And if you look at WPP here in Australia, we've got Amy Buchanan running Group M, Katie Riggs-Smith, CEO of Mindshare. We've got Sally Hussain, the CEO of Ogilvy. We've got me in the Chief Strategy Officer role, and many, many other women who are taking these big senior positions. And that's wonderful to see, and we want more of it. So we are setting targets. We are making sure we are doing what we can to make sure that we do have that equal representation, Jane. And I, for one, as a woman, am thrilled to see what we're doing at WPP.
Yeah, that's fabulous. I know, having grown up in the marketing industry over the last 20 plus years, I can just see how that wave of gender equality is taking over lots and lots of businesses, and particularly in your world. So that's wonderful to see these women stepping up to get equal roles. So I'm interested, when we talk about psychological safety, a lot of that is to do with the ability to be creative and to put yourself on the line when you put forward creative ideas to your peers, your colleagues, to your clients. WPP talk about using the power of creativity to build better futures for people, planet, clients, and communities. I love that. I'm just wondering, when it comes to the workplace, can you share any policies that you've introduced over recent times that provide your own people with a better future as it relates to work?
Yeah, absolutely, Jane. And I'm glad you love that, because I love that too. And we are doing everything we can to live up to that promise that we've made to all of our people all around the world, and particularly in Australia. One of my favourite examples right now is what we're doing inside Group M. And Group M is a significant part of our business. We have 900 people alone inside Group M. And we've launched and redefined a program called Strive. And Strive really redefines the future of work, making sure that people can pick how they're going to have a flexible workplace for themselves that serves their families and their communities. And I must say, of all the programs that we have launched, this one has probably got us the most positive feedback, because we've got people saying, thank you for recognizing that a work is part of my life, not my life. It's just a part of who I am. And so we've got all sorts of flexible work practices and programs where people can pick and choose how they work, when they work, to get the most out of them so that they can do the school drop-off. They can spend time tucking their kids into bed. They can read to their children. They can pick them up from school. They can do all the things that they need to do. If they've got parents or others that they're caring for, how do we make sure that as a role of a carer, they're not lost in their own world, and they're not making sure that they're getting the time that they need to do what they need to do to be a good person within their family structure. So we're launching very tangible programs to allow our people to live their best lives and to effectively redefine the future of how we're working, accelerated by COVID, no doubt, but in a wonderful way that says to people, we know that if you are a happy individual, you're going to be much better at your work. And normally it used to be a generation ago, we don't really need to know about your work situation. You can just take that away from us. We were not interested. We just want to look at you as a unit of labour. That thinking is gone. And I'm really proud to say that Strive is one of the best programs we've got.
That's great. And I love, as I'd expect, the way that you've branded it as well to help people really connect to it emotionally. Brené Brown, the sort of famous social researcher, has talked about vulnerability being the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. And your industry's success is built on all three of those traits. How do you provide a workplace that enables people to be vulnerable? What sort of practices and policies do you have that really support your people being able to be vulnerable?
Great question, Jane. Fantastic question, particularly for people who are creative. And obviously, creativity is subjective. There is an ego attached to all of the work that we all produce, and we want to work gently with our people. We say to everybody, all of our 3,000 people, there is no right or wrong, and there is no judgment in the thinking or in the creativity. What there is the desire for you to have an opinion and come to the table to have a point of view. And the minute we say to people, listen, you're going to make mistakes, there's going to be boo-boos along the way. There are going to be things that we're not going to go with because the idea could be stronger. But what we seek from you is an expression and a point of view. No one will ridicule, no one will laugh, no one will judge it. What we will look for you to do is to come into the room with an opinion. Immediately what you see across all of our businesses is that the shackles come down, people relax, people start to talk, communicate, collaborate, and all this incredible content starts. It's really saying to people, we just want you to show up. We just want you to be present. We want you to have an idea, have an opinion. We will work through that and see if it's something that we will inevitably eventually sell to the client. But we want you to be your best self, and we're in a safe place where you can have any thought, anything you want to talk about. We're here to hear your idea, your opportunity, your strategy. I think by talking in that language, particularly with people under the age of 30, and that's really the bulk of our workforce, we've seen some incredible results of good quality work because people are unafraid to share an opinion, which is great.
That's wonderful. And yeah, I think, when you talk about those presenting those creative ideas, that is almost when you're at your most vulnerable, right? Because you're sort of talking about something that matters deeply to you. So when we're talking about vulnerability, that leads us nicely into psychological safety, which again has got a lot of traction over the last few years. Psychological safety, by definition, is the belief that no one will be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. And Google identified it as the most important factor for high-performing teams. The 100% Project has just released some research called Breaking Dad, and this focuses on psychological safety for men, particularly relating to their participation in flexible work and extended parental leave. And this research found that men are likely to be stigmatised and labelled as not being serious about their careers if they request things such as long-term parental leave or part-time work. You've talked about Strive and the fabulous things that does to help people live their best lives and work differently. I'm wondering, with regards to parental leave, what policies does WPP have in place with regards to this for not just the primary carer, which is typically the woman, but also the second parent?
Jane, it's a great question. We have a 16-week primary carers leave policy. We encourage dads, the men in those relationships, to take that leave if they can. And we also have a 4-week secondary carers policy there as well. But what's interesting in all of this is that more and more we are seeing men taking this up. And that is great. To be in your child's life in those first few weeks is an unforgettable experience, as a lot of our parents tell us, a lot of our fathers in particular. And what we find is that those numbers are increasing in our organisation. And look, it's a great tragedy that in this day and age, there's still a societal idea that if men opt out or take some time out to help raise their children in those early weeks and months, they're somehow less than. We go out of our way to say to all the men that work at WPP, this is the most enriching part of your life, and it'll make you, and here's the interesting point, a better and more productive and more interesting person. The way to learn in life is to connect with human life, the one that you've created, your own. And when we get them back into their jobs, into their gigs, they're passionate, they're excited, they're interested, they're thinking about the future because now they have the most important future to protect, that of their own child. And so we're looking at that connection between children, creativity, innovation. Anyone who's played with a little kid, and I've had, nieces and nephews my whole life as they grow up, my brother's kids, you talk to the average 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old, you have never seen a unit of humanity more creative than a little kid. And so by looking at those connections and looking at parents in a much more holistic, a much more imaginative way, we're actually getting men who are just more interesting when they come back into their jobs. And by talking about it that way, the way that I've just talked about it, it makes them go, you know what, this is a good thing. No one's going to judge. It's not going to be a step back in my career progression. It's actually going to make me a better and more productive and more interesting person. And that's how we're talking about it now. So, and we're seeing the rewards. It's reaping good benefits. And I suspect as we continue to do this more and more so.
Now, that's great. I love that not only, is it something in it for them to be with their child, but they actually build skills, whether it be creative or something else, that they can actually then leverage back in the workplace, so they can actually see there's a real benefit. We've also seen, from speaking to quite a lot of men who have taken parental leave, the levels of empathy that they build as a result of taking that leave for other women, mainly, who take extended leave, and the impact that has on their careers, their superannuation, the fact that they may miss a year in the workforce and have to come back with skills that may be a little bit out of date. It actually really builds that empathy, which again makes them better leaders, better people, better parents. So, there's some real benefits we're seeing increasingly from people just taking some time out.
Absolutely. And also giving themselves the permission to just stop in the professional paid employment arena, allowing them to connect and to look around. I mean, the thing about the industry that we're in, Jane, we're in creative industry. You've got to look up. You've got to see the world. You've got to look at all aspects of life. And bottom line, we know for a fact that if you are using the kinds of empathetic skills that you need in order to survive a dozen nights of a crying baby, it's going to open up the possibility and your imagination and your ability to connect and empathize in a way that no other experience in life can. And so again, by using the language and reinforcing all the positive aspects, I think we're finding that we're really getting a lot of our people, men and women, to look at this entirely differently and to make space for them when they come back into the role, once they've wanted to come back in full time. So it's just been a really, really interesting thing for me to see as well.
Yeah, I think there's an Einstein quote that says there's no room for creativity in a busy mind. And yes, it's a different kind of busy when you take time off, but it does allow you, to your point, to just look up and pause and think about other things. I'm just wondering, what do you think contributes to that negative reactions that men today in 2022 still get when they do request or non-traditional working conditions like extended parental leave? And is it something that comes from within, or do you think it's from their peers? What do you think's stopping them?
Jane, I have read everything there is to read on this because I am fascinated about the fact that there, with such activity and discussion in the women's movement, in how women are portrayed, in what's happening in our world, I fear that somehow there hasn't been nearly enough conversation about the role of men. And in looking at all the research, talking to the hundreds and thousands of people that work at WPP who are male, much of what comes up is this sense that there still is this outdated notion that a man's job is to bring home the bacon, sort out the finances, be the breadwinner. But nobody really talks about the fact that a lot of men crave equality themselves in their relationship, where they can share the duties of child rearing, share the duties of financial responsibility. And yet there isn't a conversation really about that as much as we have about women. And I think for a lot of it, I think society still is a little bit behind the eight ball, that there are a lot of men out there who welcome relinquishing this notion that their job is to provide. They would love to share that. They would love to share the parenting roles. They would love to share a lot more. But again, society needs to say, guess what? It is okay to share it all, good and bad, the messy and the beautiful, because there's great beauty in the mess of raising kids, trying to make an income, paying a mortgage, worrying about school fees and all the other things. Ultimately, we need to get real. I think this government, this country, our corporations, the business community needs to get real about what true equality looks like at all levels: financial equality, intellectual equality, emotional and physical equality for men and women. And I don't think we're there yet, sadly.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's wonderful. Your perspective, global perspective, and also your background as a social forecaster, I think allows you to really kind of read all the data and start thinking about what can we do, whether it's at a government or an organisational level. And I'm just wondering, when you do tap into your global network within WPP and with your clients' global networks, are you starting to see, whether it's in Australia or another country or a particular industry, gender equality take on more momentum than in others? I know in some some industries you could argue are a little bit slower than others. Are you seeing some countries really start to push forward, or some industries really start to push forward?
Well, look, I think it's no surprise that our Nordic countries are the trailblazers in pretty much everything, and they are a terrific model for what is possible. And frankly, what should be the law, what should be real. It is really interesting when I talk to our graduates that are starting at WPP, men and women, they kind of look at me and go, why is this even an issue? Shouldn't it just be that everything's equal, everyone's 50-50, and then we are legitimately in a situation where it's a meritocracy, the best person for the job, because we have equal representation, male and female. I hope that this is a conversation we no longer need to have in a decade's time. But in everything I'm seeing, particularly from our client side, there isn't a week that goes by, Jane, that I am not talking about this very issue with every one of our clients, with every one of our organisations and all the other countries around the world in the WPP family. All of us is looking to equality, gender equality, but also all the other equalities. I am a migrant child who speaks a language other than English, at home constantly. The only time I speak English is really at work. I come from the western suburbs of Sydney. It's not a place where normally you would end up in an industry like mine. And I break all of those rules and all of those covenants in terms of where people from our industry tend to come from. We need to look at cultural, religious, all the ways to be diverse. Gender is just the tip of the iceberg, but I am seeing our clients. This is on the agenda of every boardroom table that I'm seeing. Whether there's as much progress as I would like, probably not, but we're talking about it. We're making plans. We're making quotas or targets, however you want to call them, so that at least there is movement.
Yeah, look, I agree. Diversity is a broad church, and we should not just be focused on gender, cultural, religious, LGBTI, there's so many forms of it. I sort of, what worries me sometimes is that people move away from gender too quickly because they sort of think, oh, well, we need to talk about all of these sorts of things, and then they suddenly don't achieve anything. So we're trying to encourage organisations to say it's the genius of the and. We need both. And when you're talking about gender, you should absolutely also be focused on cultural, age, experience, all of those other forms of diversity. So, yeah, it's great to hear those conversations are happening at the level that you're involved in. So, in ending our podcast today, research predicts that it'll still be at least 100 years before we reach gender equality in the workplace. Psychological safety for men and enabling them to take time out to look after their children not only allows their partners to return to work earlier, but evidence says it also has positive benefits on families and the broader society. How hopeful are you that we can really accelerate the pace of change? And how do you think your industry, one that has enormous influence over behavioural change, can support this movement?
Jane, it's a incredibly important question. We have a big megaphone at our disposal, and that megaphone is one of marketing and communications and, of course, ultimately advertising. We belong to an organisation called the Unstereotyped Alliance, which is very much about breaking down stereotypes in all forms of communication. If you see it, you can be it. We know that. If you see it reflected in popular culture, in the movies, in advertising, in any form of content that streams on any social platform, you will start to think that that is what is possible for you. We and our creatives, our writers, our art directors, our strategists have a huge, and I think not just a role to play, but I think a huge responsibility in showing people what the world can look like and how it can be. How we can have men taking considerable time off to raise their own children. Those children didn't just come into the world with the mum. It came into the world with more than just one participant, showing people what true gender equality looks like, showing women running corporations and growing a family and growing a relationship, showing this in all the various stripes. And I think we need to show it more often. I think we need to be particular about how we reflect society, but also how we shape it, and be courageous in looking at what it should look like and putting those images out into the marketplace and out into the world so that society can get comfortable making these choices. Unstereotyped Alliance is such a great way for us to contribute. We're members. A lot of our clients are members. We are having these conversations all the time. But ultimately, I keep saying to all of our people, if you see it, you can be it. People digest what they think they can achieve and what they see around them. And we've just got to make sure that what we're representing, what we're showing, creating, illustrating is in fact a future that we want. And we're big on that, and we're trying to do that every day.
I love that. I'm so energised by what you've just said and the way that your organisation and the industry can really help promote equality, not just in the workplace, but in the world. So thank you. And I'm just wondering, is there any other message that you'd like to share with our listeners on the benefits of gender equality and or psychological safety in organisations generally, or your industry more specifically?
What I would say, Jane, is what I know for sure is that when you have a table that is equally represented in both genders, different ways of thinking, different ways of being spring forth. You need differences of opinion, particularly with regard to gender, all the others that we talked about as well, Jane, but you need this spectrum. When you get a spectrum, here's what happens. Innovation blossoms, creativity explodes, the end result is much better. Everybody gets excited, and the passion if you could bottle and sell that kind of passion, you wouldn't need to do anything else. And so again, we need more voices at the table, and more voices help everybody, notwithstanding the fact that for our clients, financially they're far more successful because the ideas and the quality of the ideas that we bring up to them are so much better.
That's great. Thank you. I know the evidence is there, but to hear you talk about your observations and what you absolutely see in business on a day-to-day basis is very compelling. So thank you, Rose, very much for your time today. I've really appreciated the insights that you shared, the experiences that you've had along the way that really support psychological safety in the workplace and thus really promote gender equality as well. So thank you very much for your time.
Jane, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure discussing what are some very important topics, and hopefully I'll see you around.
Thank you, Rose. If you'd like to find out more about our research and our podcasts and how you can help promote gender equality in your workplace, please visit our website, the100percentproject.com.au. Thanks for listening.